Hopping in attitude, resilience as a pathway to joy in Dante's Purgatory. Walk like you mean it. That was the caption I received with this picture of my niece many years ago. The photo enhanced my already heightened curiosity about how her personality would develop. The answer I was awaiting came when she was 12. I watched as she deftly held her own in a discussion with her mother, who makes her living in the fashion industry. On my wedding day, my niece's mom was laser focused on getting my makeup just right. I saw that that little girl had not only turned out to be one of the kindest people I have ever known, even before she was a teenager, she had mastered the art of speaking to be heard without ruffling feathers. She shared her carefully considered opinions with her mom about the approach to take with my makeup. She's a sphinx, I thought, larger than life. I was inspired by that little muse for her way of listening deeply and participating in conversations graciously and confidently. The old soul seemed to be carrying a secret that she would gladly share with us if only we had ears to hear. By age 12, my niece was copying an enviable attitude, always understated and deeply grounded. Her parents are quietly and appropriately delighted by their joyful, fierce daughter. What had ignited my curiosity about her personality occurred several years before my niece could walk. In fact, it began with her conception. I was having dinner with her parents-to-be at a restaurant with a stunning view of the Pacific Ocean. I was just digging into my entree of jumbo scallops. Suddenly, though the restaurant was cavernous, I felt a warm breeze and heard someone whisper in my right ear. "Pregnant," the voice said. That's all I heard, but it was an unmistakable message. And before I could edit myself, I put down my fork, turned to the mother, and said, "You're pregnant." She laughed and sat back in her chair. I repeated myself, "You're pregnant." I heard it whispered in my ear. "No." "What?" "Come on." "Yeah," I said, "you're pregnant." She stared at me bemused as I turned to the father-to-be, someone I would describe as playful and knowing. He was beaming. No hesitation, no incredulity. Our next stop was Safeway, where we bought cognac and a pregnancy test. While Dad and I sipped cognac, Mom was in the bathroom with the pregnancy test. We couldn't help but laugh as one curse word, repeated in rapid succession, reached the door. She was apprehensive but excited. We then ducked out to the nearby 24-hour Walgreens, this time for a box of 2 pregnancy tests. The pharmacy was at the site of a dream I'd forgotten about in which my niece's mom was pushing a stroller in my direction. I saw a giggly, wiggly baby, perhaps 6 months old. She looked like both of her parents who have different ethnic backgrounds. On round 2, one pregnancy test was positive and the other inconclusive. What I didn't realize at the time was that the likelihood of the pregnancy being viable was slim. But 9 months and 1 week later, I held that giggly baby who was not only born joyful, she was tenacious from the moment of conception. She runs deep, but she's gentle. She's present, curious, and on the lookout for the good that is yet to come. She embodies joyful tenacity. Are some people born with an inclination to tenacious stubbornness and others to tenacious resilience? Does it have to do with disposition, discipline? I won't try to respond to those questions tonight, but I think they're useful food for prayer and contemplation. Peter Morin, the Catholic worker and colleague of Dorothy Day, noted, "We are trying to build a world in which it's easier to be good." To that, Dorothy Day added that God meant things to be easier than we have made them. So why is resilience so elusive? A longtime friend said, in helping me navigate a sticky situation with a family member, she said, she gave me a lesson that I think God patiently and repeatedly conveys throughout our lives. That is, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you, as well as hear me now, believe me later. Spiritual progress invariably requires agency, right? Where the word agency comes from agere, which is action. It is to act. It is the opposite of sloth, which beyond a lazy body or mind poisons the will to the point where we say to God and ourselves, I could not care less. Dante would have us believe that there is an indiscernible transition between this life and the next. What we do here, we might do in hell for eternity. This is not an entirely abstract idea because, absent the demons, Satan frozen in a pool of tears, and bodily torments, no one escapes at least a few hellacious experiences on this side of life. So why is it so hard to get the hell out of our own way? After all, when the world pushes us to our knees, we're in the perfect position to pray. We can be held captive by our attitudes, so capere means to seize. This can be positive or negative. We can be active participants in shaping our perceptions, or we can succumb to baseless distortions. We can get a handle on our attitudes, or we can choke on them. Lucifer, the light-bearing angel, the brightest bulb in the box, tried to displace God. He could not be grateful for the gifts he had been given. He'd only be satisfied with primacy of place, and he fell headlong into the abyss. He ended up frozen in hell with no trace of his former loveliness or rationality. Satan lost perspective. He was unrepentant. He dug in his heels and began a very effective recruitment program, amassing an army to expand his empire. Satan implemented his strategy until Christ interrupted his master plan. Perhaps the most important thing Dante learned from watching Satan hiss, spit, and curse, unable to form a single rational thought, is that perspective is everything. Satan literally has no personality. But while we still have life in us, we can change course. Purgatory provides the opportunity to learn to love God, free from the distractions that distort the truth on this side of life. It affords the time and the place to recognize in ourselves the image and likeness of God, as opposed to the cloudy reflection we see in a funhouse mirror. But even Dante hangs out in the antechamber to Purgatory for as long as possible in order to avoid climbing 7-story mountain. Unlike a tragedy, which has a good beginning and a sad ending, the Divine Comedy starts badly in dark, frightening woods, but ends up in joy. It is a transcendent poem that has infused the Christian imagination with an intricate, hope-filled theology of the afterlife. Though it was not formally established as a doctrine until the Council of Florence in the 15th century, purgatory had been a serious topic of discussion since 1274 and was part of popular belief for many earlier centuries. Dante was not alone in sharing his thoughts. But what is the function of purgatory in Dante's view? In Canto 23, he describes purgatory as the mountain that straightens those whom the world has made crooked. However, there is a pandemic-level misunderstanding about how Dante, and through him, the Church conceptualizes purgatory. First, it's fundamentally different from hell in that in this school for the soul, we suffer willingly instead of resentfully. If Dante's vision came in the form of a journey, rather than strictly through the power of his imagination, he really wants us to believe that he took this journey. Throughout purgatory, people meander and stumble towards paradise. All of the souls in purgatory will eventually arrive in heaven. Nobody enters who has lost the capacity for resilience. The sin with which Dante personally struggled the most was pride. According to St. Bonaventure, pride has a twofold root: fear badly cringing and love badly seeking. For example, we might lash out at someone when we're afraid of being humiliated, fear badly cringing. Love is holy, but stalking the person we love is not. That's love badly seeking. The penitent souls in Canto 11, Terrace of Pride, recite a paraphrase of the Lord's Prayer about human limitations and concern for others. The commanding nobleman, Umberto Aldobrandeschi, wonders whether any of his listeners ever heard him. If his sins had landed him in hell, he would have sounded more like a clanging gong, banging away and turning others off. But in Purgatory, he's curious and bends in humility to hear Dante. Oderisi, Umberto's fellow pilgrim and a proud manuscript illuminator, now sings the praises of a former competitor, his student no less, Franco Bolognese. Reflecting on who we see as our own competition is time well spent. The joy of knowing the risen Christ, or even of taking a small step in his direction, draws us into the very heart of God. St. Francis of Assisi, St. Thomas More, St. Teresa of the Andes, Teresa of Avila, the future St. Dorothy Day, the satirical genius Erasmus, and scores of other holy men and women whose sense of humor has helped them become observers of themselves and forbearing towards others. From them, we learn that joy, as opposed to fleeting happiness, requires tenacity, a willingness and commitment to cling to Jesus for dear life. So what are some of the key characteristics of Dante's Purgatory? There's an attitudinal difference between those in hell and purgatory. In the latter, the souls know that its fires are cleansing rather than punitive, whereas hell is ice cold. So it makes people turn in on themselves. So it's a posture that's both self-protective and isolationist. In purgatory, people are very courteous to one another. They're even courteous to Virgil, pagan, who serves as Dante's primary guide throughout the poem. Also, Mount Purgatory quakes when a soul is released into heaven, indicating that creation itself participates in salvation. Not only is the world infused with the grandeur of God, so too is purgatory. In hell, people can only grunt and curse. In purgatory, people are calm enough to sing hymns. Or are they calm because they sing? Purgatory is a middle course between two states. And this is why I have the blue and the salmon color going from night to day. There is a focus on the contrast between day and night. One of the rules is that there is no climbing at night because without illumination, we'll lose our footing on the winding mountain path. Contemplation, which is a companion of purgation, requires that we spend the nighttime being still. And even when we climb in the daylight, there's no looking back, no dwelling on sin. In purgatory, gravity becomes lighter with the soul's ascent because we drop our baggage along the way. In Canto 12, Dante notices a change in his body as an angel brushes his wing against Dante's forehead, erasing one of the 7 P's, right? The letter P for peccatum or sin, with which he was marked. He hears Matthew's version of the first beatitude, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Humility, then, staying close to the ground, is an effective treatment for the sin of pride. And I've always found this delightful, that in the Carceri outside of Assisi, you have these teeny tiny doors in the Hermitage where the friars had to squeeze through, and you can still see those. Since Hollywood has long been captivated by the idea of purgatory, we're familiar with the basic plot. It's the arena where we confront the 7 deadly sins. But for Dante, Purgation is the necessary undertaking that results from loving the wrong things or the right things too little or too much. For example, the slothful might love goodness, but not enough. Therefore, the lazy or rows harder in purgatory. In Canto 18, the pregnant Mary visiting with the pregnant Elizabeth is offered an example of holy zeal. By contrast, the shiftless, slothful souls work a double shift, possibly for having neglected even to pray. It's intriguing that Dante does not hear prayers or prayer requests in purgatory. He just sees penitents working. They know what they need to do, and with great or little efficiency, they do it. They don't waste energy railing about a past that they cannot change, or other people's roles in the pain of their earthly life. Using the poem's internal clock, Dante's tour of purgatory lasted about 30 hours. But on the other side of life, purgation can be a protracted process because we're stubborn and our will is weak. But any reference to the amount of time spent in purgatory, so for example, they will eventually make it to paradise, is not worth deconstructing for our purpose. I'm happy to leave God's concept of time in the realm of mystery. No one Dante meets is concerned about how many hours or years it will take to get to paradise. In Canto 30, filled with hope upon Dante's visit, 100 of heaven's messengers and ministers echo Matthew 21, verse 9. Blessed is he who comes. It seems that God is just glad to see us there. By the end of his journey through hell, heaven, and purgatory, Dante discovers that life is a joyful pageant. He no longer sees any value in sitting on a hard bleacher as a spectator, but chooses instead to join the procession of life oriented towards Christ. The friar's nickname for him was Il Pensieroso, the one who broods. He was probably an Enneagram 4, and I get it. As a poet theologian, his main focus in sharing his vision is human fulfillment. Along with his English contemporary, Julian of Norwich, Dante learned through divine revelation that if we remain openly and stubbornly fixed on thriving in the midst of trauma and chaos, all will be well, doubters be damned. And that is a cause for celebration. On this side of life, we know that stubbornness is a lonely, losing disposition, but tenacity, reaching out beyond ourselves, is needed both for confession, which is represented here by the white step. It's got 3 stairs that bring him into purgatory, the gates to purgatory. And contrition, which has these cruciform cracks. It's the black step. And of course, the red one is satisfaction. Through confession and contrition, we reach satisfaction, where the word satis, the root word, both Latin and earlier in Sanskrit, means enough. Right? We make satisfaction for our sins. Jesus is the one, though, who in and of himself is enough. That said, Augustine also noted that the one who created you without you will not redeem you without yourself. Therefore, we have to have had enough of our own awful behavior in order to learn enough so that we can enjoy the one who is himself enough. Our assistance in confession and contrition comes through the love of Jesus, who, as Paul said in Colossians 1, verse 20, reconciled to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Conversion, however, is hard work that requires us to get out of our own way. It's also a chicken and egg situation. How do we start to decide to stop self-sabotaging? If my 98-year-old father is right, and who, if not him, we make changes when we are just plain tired of the way things are. I also think that joy tips the scale and provides momentum. When we find ourselves in the dark woods with Dante, having lost our way in the middle of life's journey, we should ask ourselves, would I rather be right or happy? Or perhaps more specifically, would I rather be right or married? Living in community? Employed? The list is the stuff of tragedies. The word resilience itself is rooted in the act of springing back into place. So the word resilience, risalire, to spring back. The theological concept of original grace includes the idea that we were made to be in right relationship with God. That is, we were and are loved. Resilience involves a habitus, a deeply indwelled pattern of working our way back to our original joy, beatitude, blessedness, with God. We have the capacity to bounce back from trauma, but unlike resurrection, it's repeatable. It belongs to the wayfaring state, and it is habit forming. As Erasmus said, a nail is dislodged by another nail, a habit by another habit. Resilience builds upon resilience. Blaming other people for our own sins, that is, deeds that only we can address, hinders the soul's journey into God. It's like doing surgery on the same patch of skin every day. The wound will never close. Satan made excuses. You caused me to fail. Adam said, we did this to ourselves. Adam confessed out of reverence and maybe some fear. Whoever acts with respect will get respect. Every management gets the labor relations it deserves. Purgatory provides an opportunity to confess our sins in order to move past them into life with Christ, which is what the medievals called perfection. It turns out that we can grieve and love and tell the truth at the same time. Confession and illumination bring us into God's presence. Purgation changes our experiences of the past because we leave it where it belongs and attend to what is called for today. Beauty, too, prepares people for truth. And what is more beautiful than humor for the way that it evokes joy? Joy, in turn, takes the sting out of the truth. It is our partner in spiritual life, which is a commitment to shedding illusions in favor of the really real. So, what is our homeostasis before we become acclimated to the habit of sinning? Are children quick to laugh because they have not yet lost the beatific vision that belongs not only to our end, but also our origin? St. Bonaventure's exploration of humanity's exit and return to God seems to support this idea. He also notes that when we lose the center of the circle, we find it with the intersection of two right angles. That is the form of the cross. It reorients us to reality, a joyful reality in which we have a lived experience of being loved and held by God, who does not lose track of us, even though we lose track of God. As with new life that is born in great pain, with the heartbreaking anguish of Jesus on the cross, resilience requires tenacity. As Bonaventure also noted, love, even more than nails, held Jesus to the cross. Resilience includes learning to live with and thrive with the ever-present reality of loss upon loss, grief piled high on top of fear, and endless vexing roadblocks. Resilience develops as we increase our willingness to tolerate ambiguity, daily losses, and even death. The death of relationships, people, security, etc. While we might have people pulling or praying for us, each person in purgatory has to do their own work, and there's no skipping steps. An illustration of spiritual work can be found in a strange tree that appears in Canto 22, where the gluttonous are purged. The tree is upside down, denying people of its fruits, as if saying, find your own real food. Dante notes that John the Baptist ate locusts and wild honey in order to live, but he thrived because he's focused on spiritual food. The one who prepared the way for Christ was spiritually mature. He knew what his work was, and with eyes wide open to any and all possible consequences, he went about his work. The kelp forest at the Monterey Bay Aquarium can illustrate healthy tenacity for those of us who are not saints. Each piece of kelp uses something called a holdfast to anchor itself to the ocean floor and to other pieces, forming a network. In groups, they tower almost 200 feet to the surface. Kelp are strong and graceful. Try to tear a fresh piece with your bare hand. It can stretch up to 40% of its length before it breaks, and it's a natural barrier to tidal waves. The kelp forest helps keep what is around it from being overwhelmed by that force of nature. Inherently resilient, one force of nature provides protection against another force of nature, not piece by piece, but as a collective. It's kind of nature's anti-bullying campaign. Salvation, too, is both an individual and communal task. Self-sufficiency is not a Christian virtue. We are saved or damned together. Like the kelp or my little niece and her parents, we can do our work if we're flexible, resilient, and transparent. Canto 8 says that it is the night that implicates your will. For half of each 24-hour period, we must be still or we'll go backwards. There's no game we can play that will change the rules of health, healing, wholeness, and holiness, which, as many of you will know, are etymologically related, all of those terms, in, I can think of at least 5 languages. So all of the Romance languages, those concepts are connected in German. It's an amazing an amazing reality when you think about health, healing, wholeness, and holiness being one fabric. We must play by God's rules. Fortunately, as Augustine says, as long as we love God in all things, we can do whatever else we want. However, progress is only possible with divine light. Therefore, the itinerary is always a day trip. But how do you know you're making progress? Well, here are a few ideas. First, when we project our actions, thoughts, dreams, words, and intentions onto a transparent film, as with an old school overhead projector, light penetrates the picture and reflects it back to us. It is an act of faith to cooperate with God, to trust that the light will illuminate our transparency and show us who we really are. As is the case with cliff diving, we might just do it if we trust that the water is deep enough for a successful jump. Second, we stop assigning primacy to things that are not, we stop assigning ultimacy to things that are not ultimate. My desires, my plans, my opinions, preoccupations, needs, preferences, perspective. We're made for one another. And in the world God created, love is always about the good of the other. Third, the psychologist David Richo makes a suggestion in How to Be an Adult, a handbook on psychological and spiritual integration. This is a book that when I read it at, I think, age 36, I wondered where it had been my whole life. And he also has a couple others on relationships and spirituality. Same idea, how to be an adult. He says, if you fear abandonment, let your partner go 1 more inch away each day and notice that you survive it. Live through the episode of fear. Notice that Rico does not give any assurances that your partner will still be there in 6 months, but you will be intact. When we push the easy button, we miss out on the joyful realization that we're still alive. And we're doing okay when we still hope in the good that is yet to come. Medieval theologians, perhaps especially Bonaventure, enthusiastically explored the concept of synderesis. Distinct from conscience, it is the spark of conscience, the thing that directs us to desire what is good, which the conscience then pursues. It is the power of the intellect that precedes discernment, an innate attraction to what is right. We know it when we feel it and recognize it when we see it. Heresy, on the other hand, is a matter of knowingly adhering to the wrong thing, adhere. We've all seen it, the fight that ensues on the way out of the church parking lot because we're sure we have the right of way. Conversion begins when the wrong thing loses its luster. At the end of Purgatory, Dante arrives at the Lethe and Uno rivers. So Lethe means oblivion, Uno means well-minded. It's kind of hard to translate. He's overwhelmed at the sight of Beatrice, his symbol of goodness and beauty. He confesses to her that he pursued trivial goods after she died. Beatrice tells Dante that he should have focused on spiritual beauty when her mortality broke his heart. With that confession, he is pulled across the Lethe River by another lovely lady, Matilda. And by the way, there are a lot of theories. We have no idea who she was. There, she tells Dante to drink of the waters of forgetfulness, that is, to receive freedom from the painful memory of sin, hence great joy at having survived an ordeal. So the healing of memories is key. What were once wounds are now scars. They no longer hurt, but they become part of our story. At the end of Purgatory, in Canto 33, Dante remembers his sins, but is cleansed of the shame. I often tell my undergraduates to, just for a moment, get a picture of just hold in their hearts and in their minds the things that hurt them now. And then I tell them, if you do your work, when you're my age, those things won't hurt anymore. They'll be part of your story. He addresses the reader directly. From that most holy wave, I now returned to Beatrice, remade, as new trees are renewed when they bring forth new boughs. I was pure and prepared to climb unto the stars. Let me read that part again. From that most holy wave, I now return to Beatrice, remade, as new trees are renewed when they bring forth new boughs. And that gives me kind of a tingle when I think about how my niece statistically should never have been born. She was the impossible conception, the impossible baby. But through resilience, that stubborn little soul became a new bough from their parents' tree. So before we move into whatever discussion you choose, I'll close with a piece of advice from the medieval Sufi poet Rumi. Don't let your throat tighten with fear. Take sips of breath all day and night before death closes your mouth. Thank you.